Hi everyone, welcome to a duology episode to talk about writing and collaboration. Delighted to be talking with the author team of Alexandra Ely and Makayla Nielson. Hello and happy Saturday to you both.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Of course, of course. Now, you also write individually. Is this true? You have publications. Alexandra, I think you've also told stories by means of podcasts and explored that format. So, curious to hear about the drawing of the two of you together and what's drawn each of you to authoring in the written word.
Alexandra, do you want to
Sure.
start? Yeah.
Sure. All right. Um, so we initially met on Instagram. We both had our own stories that we were working on and needed a writing buddy. And so we first started off just reading each other's work and kind of got comfortable in that setting and before we moved on into collaboration.
Yeah, it's been really fun. We have tons of interests outside of writing that we happen to overlap on. So it was kind of fun to just as our friendship grew and as we got to know each other's writing, it worked out really well that we were critique partners and then turned into co-authors. But yeah, we both write our own stuff. We both have things published on podcasts and journals and all sorts of things, which we'd be happy to share. They're on our websites, and most things are free, which is really fun. Um, but one thing that is really fun with Alexandra and I too, we are in different states. She's in Kentucky, I'm in Utah. So we do a lot of this. We do a lot of talking on Marco Polo and not necessarily in real time. So it's kind of fun for us to be talking together at the same time. So thanks for the opportunity.
Weird.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, glad to facilitate the gathering, and what a great use of Instagram to connect in that way.
It was, I think, really unique. I remember her post that I found through, I think it was like a follow loop or some sort of challenge. And she mentioned that she was writing at the time we were both writing historical fiction. And she also had a baby boy around the same age as mine. And I could just like, hey, we've got a lot in common. You're looking for a writing partner. I'm looking for a writing partner. You want to switch first chapters and see if it works? And it did really, really well.
Nice, nice. Well, curious about that process, but before we get there, I know that you have Chimera's Blood, which features a character who's around the age of 18, a young adult. So anything that either of you would like to say about the draw to writing a young adult character or young adult literature, anything of that nature that you'd like to speak to?
Sure.
Makayla, you can go first.
Yeah. So I think YA is awesome. I feel like that time of life is it's fluctuating. You're learning who you are. All of those like why and how and who questions are really at the forefront. And I think even though, I mean, I'm not a young adult, but I feel like I can relate to these characters because even though I'm no longer in that age group, I feel like those, we never stop growing. And so those questions are still applicable. We can always ask, how can we be better and how can we grow? And we can still learn from these young characters as we try to do that ourselves.
Anything
Certainly.
to add on that?
I am drawn to the young adult genre because it's a fascinating time in life where you are dealing with so many hard life questions. And oftentimes, the books that we read during that phase define us. And what author doesn't hope that their writing can inspire and encourage and just become a part of someone's memory.
Yeah. You said you both started in historical fiction, and this is more of a science fiction, uh, book by many. I hope it's not historical. I hope I wasn't asleep in history class that much. Anything about what drew you to the science fiction side of storytelling?
Yeah, so science fiction, I've always read science fiction. It's one of my faves. The Giver is one that I go back to. Ender's Game is one that I go back to. I've done all of the dystopian, the popular ones, Hunger Games and Insurgent and all of those. I'm currently rereading Uglies. So, I mean, those were my bread and butter. And so, when we had this idea to work together, um, in my mind, it was always, dystopians. I love dystopian. And so that was kind of one of the foundational kind of ideas for this story.
I am more eclectic in the genres that I like. I like a little bit of every genre. Science fiction is one, however, that I've watched more movies than I have read books. A lot of my early training was in screenplays. And so like a lot of my high school was watching and critiquing film and scripts. So that was kind of more of my intake. But I love the action that it poses. I love that it is like anything goes. It's easy to write in that sense compared to historical fiction where you have to look up the etymology of a word. In
Hmm.
historical fiction, you have to look up if a word was used back then. And what's really, really fun with fantasy and science fiction and pretty much anything modern, you don't have to worry about that. And so there's just a lot of creative freedom that is very, um, that draws me to the genre.
Yeah, I think Alexandra's writing in general is very like you want to you want to find the action in there, and she's very like adventure and all of that. And so when you read Chimera's Blood, it has a lot of her like adventurous, like yeah, we're gonna go and we're gonna do the thing, and it's great. So it's a really fun story because of the backgrounds that we have kind of meshing together.
Nice. And anything that you'd like to say about the premise of the book, any of the beats that you want to share with readers? I know that the historical fiction and exploration that you've done has to inform it in some way because so much of science fiction is social commentary and you pull in parts of history and kind of twist them. So anything about that that you'd like to mention?
I would say that so when we initially came up with the idea, Makayla suggested the genre, which sounded great to me. And then she was also really good at letting history come into the setting. And so it's kind of almost become a theme, not a strong theme, not the main theme, but there are specific times that in our story mirror history and kind of showing that history repeats itself. And I've had a lot of fun with that. Kind of being able to bring in all of the research that I did do for historical fiction, but having fun with it in a non-constrained form.
Yeah, I think I mean, chimeras are based on mythology as well. They're different in our story. They're more, it's science fiction based and not necessarily mythology based, but that's where the idea of chimeras kind of came from, these morphs of different creatures. So we do have an underlying historical theme in this book, in both events and the chimeras themselves.
Nice. I mentioned that collaborative process earlier. I'm always interested in hearing how people go about that. And it sounds like there's some chapter exchange that's happening. So I'm wondering what are the ingredients there? What helps you accomplish what you're after?
Technology. Uh, we have, because we already had an idea of each other's style and sound and voice by working with each other individually leading up to this joint work. It we meshed really well together. We just kind of naturally fell into a rhythm, and we were able to use Google Docs a lot. We text and we Marco Polo, certainly email and phone calls when we want, but it helped that we developed this rhythm of one would draft, one revises that section, and then the other one, we just go back and forth until we agree. And there's one sentence in book one, we're hoping for it to be a series. And so in Chimera's Blood, there's a specific sentence where like every other word is one of us.
Mm.
And so we've really been able to blend our voice into one.
Yeah, if you were to look at our Google Doc, it's black where the first person kind of drafted it, and usually it's, you write until you don't see the scene anymore, and so then the next person can pick it up. But so you write it, and then you have the other person go in, and they're, Alexandra's pink, and then I go back in, and now there's pink and green and black and comments, and so each of us have touched every word, every phrase, every sentence and paragraph of this story. It really is a mesh. If you take out one, there's no coherent story. It's
Mm.
it's both of us together, truly.
For sure. And before we even start writing, oftentimes there is a long process of brainstorming happening before that. So that way, at least one of us has a vision of what we want the scene to be like and to get started, and being able to collaborate so consistently, like we talk daily. There's no writer's block, which is really, really fun because when one is like, I don't really know what should happen next, oftentimes the other one will spark an idea and it just keeps going.
Yeah, our brainstorming process is fun too, because there a lot of the times we start talking, and by the end I'm like, that was nothing like what we started with, and it's so much better, and it's so fun.
It's nice. Well, you mentioned there's a series, so, or the idea of a series. So I'm curious, are you planning that? Have you brainstormed some of those steps,
So
Since
beginning
you,
with the end in mind?
go ahead, Michaela.
so the Alexandra, I feel like, is the brainstormer of, like, we're gonna, like, she gets all these project ideas, and so we have like documents of like one's a prequel, one's book four, one. So we've actually drafted. Well, we have edits back on book one, so this one will be published hopefully end of year or beginning of next year with Jumpmaster Press. Book two, we have,
Three
it's
quarters? No,
probably a
half.
fourth of it, but it's
Okay.
the length of a half of of Chimera's Blood. And then we have a short story that's already written about this series. So we've got at least four, and this short story. But this world is so fun, and I feel like everything that we write is like, oh, that adds so much. Like it's really, really great.
I would add to that that we also, or we have the idea of an Easter egg. It would be like a side short story that would fit into book two, and which might, so yeah, I kind of keep coming up with ideas. She's like, yes, she's my enabler. That's the problem.
That's just
But when we finished book one, we're like, do you really want to be done with this series? Like with this book? Are we saying goodbye to these characters? Is this the end? We're like, no. And so we quickly then brainstormed because to me, I like it when the story begin through all three series, it started off as a trilogy, has that main plot carried throughout. Sometimes they can really feel disjointed. And that's kind of a personal pet peeve of mine in writing. And so I was like, we have to have like the plot for book two and three before we call this a trilogy. And so in no time brainstorming, we figured that out. It was just naturally already there. Um, just to expand it a little bit bigger, raise the stakes a little bit higher. And before we knew it, we had a trilogy that just kind of then grew a prequel and then a follow-up story with a side character.
Nice. You've also both crafted in short fiction, so it makes sense that there would be some Easter egg short stories in there somewhere along the way.
They're a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
Well, short
Too bad.
stories, I feel like it wasn't something that I had ever really been interested in, until I realized, like, on my own, this was a little while ago. It's like on my own, it is really difficult for me to finish an entire book. It was like things weren't clicking the way that I thought they should. And I had heard that short fiction is a great way to figure out that arc kind of on a smaller scale. And so I had started doing that and fell in love with short fiction. I love it. I've got a bunch of different genres too. Things that I have a couple of horror short stories coming out with Collective Tales Publishing, um, probably near the end of the year. But anyway, I was like, horror's not my thing, but it's a short story, and so I feel like you can kind of, you don't have to, it's not putting all of your time and all of everything is writing on it. It's like, no, you can try and you can do different things. And short fiction is just great. I love it.
Have we missed anything that you want to make sure to include before we get to the last question about where people can find information and find the book and things like that?
Um, we could
I
share,
always give space for that, so just making sure.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
we could share a little bit about what Chimera's Blood is, what it's about.
Yeah, please do.
Great. Zan, do you want to start?
I'm so glad this is, I'm so glad that this is pre-recorded. My
That
husband's
is
letting
it's a nice convenience to it, yeah.
my husband quick like just gave me his earbuds for better sound, except for ridiculously tiny ears. And so nothing stays in them. Fun fact you really wanted to know about me. Anyway, so yes, Chimera's blood. So Chimera's blood takes place 3 generations after the meltdown, when radiation plants began to explode and these strange creatures called chimeras started to emerge. And they're called chimeras because they are a conglomeration of creatures and they are terrifying because if you get a drop of their blood on you, it's extremely poisonous and it will kill you.
So, our story with Haven, she's our main character. She's a young Chimera trainer, and she receives a note that her brother has been kidnapped. And so she has to go and in exchange for him, she has to bring a young traveling hematologist named Ashton, and she has to trade him for her brother. And so our story just follows those two across Amaranda, which is present day America and Canada, um, to go and find him.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm very interested in reading it. I am a science fiction fan. That's a go-to genre for me, and particularly dystopia. I'm also a dystopian fan as well. Uh, Anything that you'd like to say about where people can find out information about the two of you, as well as where they can go and check out the book?
Yeah, so our websites and would be the best place. You can sign up for our mailing lists there. There will be updates about Chimera's Blood, publication, book release, all that fun stuff, along with our individual works. A lot of our short stories can be found also from our websites and social media links.
Yeah, mine's MakaylaNielson.com, and Alexandra is Alexandra Ely Books. Um, we've got fun stuff on our websites too. If you sign up for our newsletter, you get free stories. We have free flip books. They're just really quite short, fun stories that you can go through the little animations. There are stories that have been published with different publishers. There are podcasts, so you can have audio. We really just want you to enjoy. Stories are important, and I think it's great to share whether we are gaining anything or not.
Well said, and many thanks to you both. We can certainly jump back anytime to have a follow-up conversation about Easter egg stories, entries, and other elements of creating that you'd like to mention. And many thanks for the time.
Well, thank you. This was great fun.
Yes, thanks so much.
Absolutely.